Cricket Love Stories, Neel Khagram here with Graham Woodward. Graham, appreciate your time today. So Graham, you're the man behind the mic as such. Can you give us a little bit of your background and your current role specifically working in cricket?
Yeah, I think it's probably because it's a face for radio, but yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I'm very fortunate. I've been involved with cricket for most of my life, certainly working life. Currently I voice All England internationals in England and Wales, which basically means presenting in ground, working with Sky for presentations, and a few other bits and bobs, but not so much these days. Which covers everything from ground announcements to match to interval entertainment and various other things, along with a few other colleagues who work with us on those. So that's the main title, but I've also had that position with Sussex and also Lords and Middlesex for the last few years. So busy time during the summer, but a very enjoyable one.
And how long have you been doing this for?
Well, I started when I was 19. Rather fell into things in a very, very lucky way, and was fortunate to get live experience at a very, very early age, which I've kind of worked from. And it was a great actual example at the time that live opportunity was actually better than qualifications to a certain extent, because although I did National Diploma in Media, which was equivalent back then to A-levels, it was live experience that was much better than actually going on to university at the time, because I had the opportunity to do so. And obviously in a lot of fields that's not the case, but certainly for me it was the best decision I actually made.
And your first opportunity into cricket came through?
So the story went, and it was quite amusing, because I never actually watched a cricket match at all until I was about 14, 15. And then midway through secondary school, me and a friend one day went to Sussex when the Benston Hedges Cup was in operation, which in various formats, probably at the time was 55 overs a side, and we went to Hove and enjoyed the day. I think Sussex were playing Surrey. Went back a few times and gradually started to follow and enjoy and actually know what was going on. And within a year or two, got to the stage where some friends that I'd made there said, well, if you're going to be here, why don't you do some work over the summer, do some stewarding. Excuse me. So I said, yeah, not a bad idea. So at the time, got to know the guy that was in charge there, and sort of suggested that I was keen to do some work. So did that, and was just checking passes, various things. And then we were at an outground at Horsham for a festival. I think I was working on the Players' Gate. And back in the day, the secretary, chief exec, however you want to call it at the time, used to do the ground announcements, whereas the scorer used to do the cricket announcements. And he was in a meeting, and this car needed moving, and I'd, at the time, wanted to do journalism. So I'd started to do a little bit of voice work, but nothing major at this point, and was going along the journalist theme, doing some writing for local papers and magazines. And there was a car, I think, that needed moving. So he was in a meeting, so I said, come on, just give us the mic, I'll do it, because it's urgent. So I did it, and everything else went from there. So I did that one announcement, and then he used to do cricket scores during the lunch breaks and tea intervals to tell people what was going on around the other grounds, because of course back then mobile phones weren't what they are now, so nobody was getting scores ball by ball as is easy with apps these days. So I started to do the lunchtime and tea time scores for him, and the following season the job became mine, where I was doing everything. But I think the real beauty of it was, because I'd become such a cricket fan, I kind of knew what I wanted to hear and the information that I wanted, which I wasn't necessarily getting. So I was then able to put that into what I made out to be the perfect job.
So when you mean the information, can you go?
Yeah, well, basically, so when you're sat there, the guy that was giving the information didn't really want to be doing it, because he was doing another job, i.e. scoring. So you want information on 50s, you want up-to-date bowling figures, you want to know what's going on. If something's happened in the middle where you're thinking, hang on a minute, what's happened here? Change of ball, or someone gets injured and retired hurt. None of this information is being given. So general information that when you're sat there watching, you know exactly what's going on.
So do you have free reign, or is it kind of scripted?
Well, back in those days, and to an extent now away from England, everything is totally free reign. So the other crucial part is, particularly obviously when you're doing internationals, which is going around the world, whatever you're saying, you have to be sure of. And obviously we have now, particularly more as times come up to the current day, we have someone that's sat with me who will be talking with various things. We've got someone that's in constant contact with the match referee and the umpires, and to make sure that information's right. But when it comes to certain things happening on the spot, you have to know what's happening, and that's where the love and the experience of the game and cricket and being involved obviously helps, because people used to think when it comes to bowling changes, when it comes to new batsmen, that I'm being told, but actually I'm just doing that from view. And that of course means that early on in a series, particularly when you get those teams that don't feature on our coverage here that often, the likes of Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, the lower countries as it were in the rankings, that may have new players, pronunciations and recognising somebody is a key factor. And I learned an awful lot from Johnny Dennis, who did the England job before I did. And Johnny gave me the tip of always looking for colours on a batsman's gloves, bat, what shoes he's wearing, so that he's instantly recognisable through binoculars from a distance. Certain grounds now we have spotters, so obviously when people come in, they're telling me who it is. But I would always check, because I'm the one that is putting the voice out there and is the one that's made to look silly if it's wrong. And bowlers, bowlers are the same. Bowling changes, we're not given the heads up. You have to be concentrating. And that's why, particularly test matches, while it's not particularly a difficult thing that people see you're doing, you are concentrating. And obviously since DRS has come into play, you're concentrating on every single ball of the day.
Yeah, we were just talking off camera. You're one of the select few people actually that have to concentrate every ball of every day, of every second, as such. So concentration levels must be high.
Absolutely, and quite often you'll try and listen in to Sky commentators or TMS while you're working, just to make sure you're on it and you're checking. Obviously 9 times out of 10 when it's England, you're obviously interested, so it's not like you're losing interest, and you're actually generally watching. And yeah, that's one of the lucky points, because most of what I do, I'm paid to be there, and I'm very lucky to be in that position. Whereas if it wasn't the case, I may pay to go and watch it. So there is that, but at the end of the day, you are there to do a job as well. And no better example of that was the World Cup final, where the drama that carried on throughout the whole of that day, particularly the latter hour and a half, where you were genuinely, and I was there working, had to tell 30,000 people what was going on, but really wanting England to win. So that was a great example where it was fantastic, and I got to do the trophy lift, which went around the world feed, which was something that is fantastic for me and will always be in place. So if I finish now with cricket, I'll always have that honour. And obviously seeing them win.
Yeah, so we'll touch on the summer that just went in a moment, because obviously some momentous moments. You talk about the World Cup, Ben Stokes and Headingley, etc. But if we just rewind back, when did you actually what year did you actually start working for England? So how did that position again come about?
So I started in '99 with Sussex, went through, and what happened, the way that I got into the England setup was that after doing several years at Sussex, televised cricket obviously was a big thing even in the early 2000s, and Sky used to cover Yorkshire Bank, Clydesdale Bank matches, Norwich Union League it's had so many different titles, but the 40 over competition, particularly when floodlights came into play, Sussex obviously were one of the first to have floodlights, and obviously used to have lots of TV games, and when the ECB used to come in, they quite often used to bring in their own crew, and I think on one occasion they had a problem, so I did it. And they were obviously quite pleased with the job that I'd done and the fact that I knew cricket, because I think that was the biggest issue, particularly when T20 came in. The idea was, let's get these people in to try and jazz it up. But when you can't pronounce people's names, or you don't know who anyone is, you lose all respectability. And I think that's what had happened. So I was in the fortunate position that when T20 came in and they had these issues, that having worked with me, it was like, actually, we want someone that knows the game and knows the players. So I got in by doing T20, and I was very fortunate. I did 12 finals days of T20, and no better day than T20 finals day. And during that time, 2007, we had the 2009, apologies, we had the T20 World Cup, which was held in England, and with it 220, myself and Johnny, who had done it before me, we basically did the competition together, which was fantastic because Johnny was very serious and dry a voice, whereas I was a bit younger and a bit more razzmatazz. So we did that competition together. So that was back in 2009. And then, of course, 2013, we had the Champions Trophy for the first time. So again, the idea was that that summer, which was an Ashes summer, we played New Zealand in the early part, and the second part was the Ashes, and squeezed in between was the Champions Trophy. So it was decided that Johnny would carry on doing New Zealand and Australia, and I would do the Champions Trophy, which was obviously, at the time, a great honour. So that's where things changed, because in the early part of that season, having done, I think at that point, 7-8 years of T20, Johnny fell ill during the New Zealand series, which was officially a warm-up effectively to the Champs Trophy. So Johnny was taken ill. I then went and did the Champs Trophy as planned. And then during the latter part of that, it was clear that Johnny wasn't going to be well enough to do the Ashes and do the travelling, because obviously that is a key part of the job, the travelling. And that's the hardest part of the job, as opposed to the job itself, maybe. So it was like, okay, what are we going to do? So it's like, right, okay. It meant a really busy summer, because T20 started, I think, the day after the Champs Trophy final, 2 days after. And then the Ashes. So it was a mixture of trying to do a bit of everything. I did my first test in 2013 at Trent Bridge, which was a fantastic test match, one of the best, for obvious reasons. It was the one where Ashton Agar very, very nearly won a game from an impossible position for Australia. Went deep into the afternoon session on day 5. It was a fantastic game. And then from there, it was quite apparent that Johnny wasn't going to be well enough to come back and do the job with the travelling, because of the treatment that he required. So because of that, I then did the 5-test series with Australia, which was obviously a great one to start with. And then from there, I've carried on from strength to strength. So 2013 was when it all happened. And here we are in 2020, just about still surviving.
So you've done 3 Ashes series,
Yep.
World Cup, 50 over World Cup,
Yep.
T20,
And 2 Champs Trophies.
and 2 Champions Trophies. Yeah. But what does a typical day actually involve? So you get to the ground, and just talk us through your day.
Yeah, basically get there. It's a long day. Get up nice and early, make sure you're at the ground. If it's a first day of a test match, half an hour before, 40 minutes before. Obviously, depending on what ground we're at, we have a sound crew with us now who provide the speakers in the ground, who I've got to work with. Now they've been the same crew all the time I've been involved. So they'll make sure that everything's in place. I'll be there before an international the day before as well. Not really test, but we normally have a briefing going over what's going to be happening during
Would you
the match.
meet, say, overseas players? Would you meet them just to confirm pronunciation of names?
Yeah, particularly early in the series. Much as the crew now, there's always a media officer now. So, but depending on where it is. If quite often people that I know within the game, Sri Lanka were a great example. A couple of years ago when Sri Lanka were over, and Chris Adams, who of course used to captain at Sussex, I know very, very well. Chris was the English liaison officer. So there we were the day before on the nursery ground at Lord's, walking round. There's Chris. I can go over and see Chris, and Chris will introduce me and we'll get the correct pronunciation, because a lot of players now will say, oh, they don't mind what we're called, you know, but you want to do it right. And there's been 2 or 3 great examples over the years of players like that. And 9 times out of 10, it's not the player themselves that moans, it's the parents.
So any examples you can give?
Well, I think the best one was a few years ago, and it had been pronounced Mashady. Craig, who played down at Somerset, and I think went on to Glamorgan, but there was various things. Everyone settled on Mashady, and then just before the Lord's final that year, where he was playing, suggestion that it was Meshada. And again, depending on who you spoke to, it was a different thing. So the day of the final, I went over to the nursery ground and spoke to him and said, right, what is it? And he said, I really don't mind what you call me, but it is Meshada. So that day at Lord's, I called him Meshada, and then from then on, everyone seemed to sort of sink into line, because I think his parents were after that very much that it should be Meshada. And at the end of the day, when it's your name, you know, it should be right. So it's, for me, it's something where it's one of those details that is worth going to actually speak to the person individually. There was another one that Steph Piley, that used to play at Sussex and went on to Warwickshire, and 2 or 3 people, some were calling Pilot, some were calling PLA. There was all sorts of pronunciations, and having grown up with him in Sussex, I kind of knew, but I still have people trying to tell me exactly what it was. And of course the current one is Labuschagne, who's at Australia, and he's going to be a formidable force in world cricket for the next few years. He looks a fantastic player. He's another one where the media and all of broadcasting were told prior to the Ashes in 2019 that we're going to call him Marnus Labuschagne, and we'll settle at that.
Okay, so going back to the actual day itself, you said you get to the ground half an hour before on a test match.
Yep.
Then just run through your kind of the protocols you go through, etc.
So the gates will normally open at 9 o'clock. There can be a bit of a change, but we're there pre-gates to make sure everything's working, all in operation. This is where things have slightly changed, because now we kind of have a show caller with us. So whereas before everything was a bit more ad lib and we could basically have free rein, obviously now trying to enhance the experience for everybody that's within the ground. Obviously, as well, with the way that the world is now, there's obviously a lot of adverts and various things that are played on the big screen that we work into, and obviously we'll always show highlights from the previous day. So normally start at around 9:30, just basically waiting on seeing on the crowd as well, because obviously there's a lot of people in. We might go a bit earlier if there's not many people in. If it's a day 3, 4, 5 crowd, we might leave it till a bit later, and we'll do our usual welcomes, facilities, sponsor recognition of where they are within the ground, that people can go and take part in activities and pick up giveaways and various other things. So that's kind of the first 30-40 minutes. Obviously on the first day you've got the toss at 10:30, where we again link in with Sky, so obviously that's something that needs to be done prior. And it gets really busy that 10:10 through to 11 o'clock, because obviously, particularly at internationals now, there's normally things going on just before. You've got kids doing Guard of Honours, you've got people ringing bell. So again, that needs to be timed to perfection to make sure that, particularly when we're at Lord's, because at Lord's it's a big part of a match day, on a big match day, that the introduction is done. And the introduction that I do quite often is a minute, giving details of what the person's done in their career. And then obviously the crowd will give them a great reception, the little dip in the applause, and then the bell. So it has to be timed really well. So a lot of that will be done, timing and practicing in that first hour between 9 and 10, while things are pretty quiet. Obviously the game starts, then things are down to me really. So for bowling changes, I've got constant contact with security at the ground. So if I know that if someone needs to find somebody, or they lose somebody, or any emergency announcement needs to go out, I've got constant contact with them, which takes us through to lunch at 1 o'clock. And again, then the show caller will give me instructions of what to do, although obviously most days it's the same thing. So once you get into the routine, it's quite simple. But again, you'll have activities. There'll be, there might be a sponsor activation during the interval. Last summer, the sponsors had us doing something on the outfield. So every lunch interval, I had to go down with a camera on pitch with 2 competitors, and a competition game took place. So that took up 15-20 minutes. Again, there'll be ad runs. Again, there'll be highlights. So there's always something going on, which again enhances the experience for people within the ground. That, okay, a lot of people are going to go off and get drinks and food, but for those that stay in the stadium bowl, there's something going on. Similar at tea, there'll quite often be a band or musical entertainment, which will get introduced. And then the only good thing about the test match is that when the play finishes, which is never at 6 o'clock, it's always at 6:30 for the extra time taken. We don't do a lot of the close of play. So after 6:30, once the players have left the field and everything, we can say our good nights and farewells. And then it's off. But of course you get to 7:15, get back to the hotel, maybe grab a bite to eat, and you're pretty tired. So there's not so much of going out on the town or anything like that, because you've got to be up at 6:30, 6 o'clock the next day to do it all again.
And the hardest part of the job, you mentioned travel.
I think the thing is, anybody that was given the opportunity to go and watch every ball of an English summer, it's a fantastic job, and it is. But obviously it does mean while you're doing it, you're giving up a block of your life to do that, which is part and parcel of it. But we obviously stay in some nice hotels over the country, which is lovely. But one hotel becomes another. It's a long time to be away, from family, loved ones, and you are away just like the players do. And the players obviously have that same issue. And it is a real commitment to do that, to be away. Because obviously if you've got a couple of series, you basically start, most summers with the international May through to September. Obviously in the years where we've had World Cups, Champs Trophies, it's even longer, because you have a month block in the middle or so where you are just constantly on the road. So it's a great job. That's the hardest part, the concentration and the travel, being away. When you're actually in the ground and you're watching the cricket and you're doing a day's work, that's kind of the easy bit. But the job, every job has a downside, whatever it may be, however it may look. But yeah, very lucky to be able to watch cricket, and as I say, to be paid to do something that if I wasn't, I would probably pay to go and watch, is a very fortunate thing.
And obviously you're reliant on your voice. So have there been any kind of instances where you've suffered from like cold, illness, sore throats, and how do you get over that? Is there a reserve in place for example, say if you wake up one morning and you just feel you just cannot speak appropriately as such?
It happened in 2013 at the end, the Oval Test match of that first Ashes. And it had obviously been an extremely long summer, because not only was I doing Champs Trophy and coming and did the Test series, I'd also been travelling an awful lot doing the T20, which was my normal schedule. And come the Oval, I was not well at all. And funny enough, Johnny was well enough. Johnny, who obviously I'd taken over from being in London, he was able to come in and do a day, which was handy. And then if you go back and see the presentation for that series, my voice is very croaky, and I do sometimes get that with once you get to September of a summer. Not so much now, because there are 2-3 of us. So there's Steve, who does an awful lot of stuff with us. He is more than capable of doing what I do, so there is someone there. But I think now, as you get older, I think for me it's just a case of learning that, making sure you get a good night's sleep, making sure you don't get too tired, because it does tend to follow on that when you start to do that, you do start to get the colds. And obviously I've got a few things that I know will work for my throat and voice, that when I start
hot drinks, warm-ups.
Absolutely, the style, everyone needs a fisherman's friend, it's basically just to make sure everything is clear. So it's when you see the signs, that's when you try and get it early.
And let's go back to this summer, the summer that just went, 2019, the World Cup and the Ashes series. Let's touch on the World Cup to start with. I know you mentioned it earlier.
Phenomenal.
Proudest?
I think so, yeah, because there was what was ironic. I mean, it was such a fantastic.
So, how many games in the World Cup did you actually?
I think I did 24.
24
of them. So,
all around the country, or just Lords?
All around the country. So I did every game at Lords, but I did, I think, all but one at Trent Bridge, all but one at the Oval, and then I did a few here and there. I did both semi-finals. So I did Edgbaston. I didn't go to Old Trafford until the semi-final. So I did stay. I say south of the Midlands, effectively. Did a couple at Taunton. So yeah, they were shared around quite well, but it was a good competition.
Culminating in
an amazing final, which actually for 2/3 was quite an ordinary game. But then obviously with a couple of hours to go, the ironic thing was the day before the final, from my own point of view, obviously the presentation at the end of a World Cup is huge, because you've got not only the lift for the competition, but you've got everything over the course of the competition which is presented, best player, most runs, wickets, whatever it may have been, and obviously the squad reads and everything. And I didn't realise until the day before that we were doing that, which is the norm obviously with England internationals in this country. So on the Saturday I found out that we were doing a rehearsal, and I said, well, I don't need to go to that. And they said, well, you do, you're doing it. So okay, right, fair enough. So I was very much aware that there was not only coverage obviously on Sky, but on the Sunday there was free-to-air coverage.
Do you get nervous?
Oh no, I wouldn't say.
Or has it just now become the norm?
Yeah, it's just the norm. So, and maybe part of my thing last year, I went into Lords early on for a game, and it was just another day, and I thought, you've got to tell yourself that you are lucky to be working at such a great venue, so you can't take anything for granted. But yeah, it's like anybody. I always used to say that if whatever your job is, you just go in and you do it naturally, and you don't think about it. So I'm quite fortunate that I'm like that, having done obviously for so long, and arguably probably for a few too long. But on that particular day, for 2/3 of the match, it was a standard match. Obviously very nervous, very proud when we played the anthems for the final. When the players were out, that was a nice moment, and got several people have given me the recordings of that, which is something nice to keep. But I was aware that there was obviously an awful lot of people watching that day that wouldn't normally watch, so the audience was bigger, particularly with the free-to-air factor away from the norm with Sky. And I'd geared myself up, particularly during the Chase second innings, that it was going to be tight. And I think then when Joss Butler got out, I kind of thought, right, that's it. So I kind of geared myself up that, okay, it's going to be New Zealand that are going to win this match. 2/3 of the audience will turn off. 80% of the crowd, of which was obviously packed at Lords, would leave very quickly. So actually this presentation, there's actually going to be no pressure on it whatsoever. And obviously that was in my mind. I got that. And of course then, gradually, Stokes started to get England back closer and closer. And there's not a great deal that I don't like to ever say this was good, because I'm always my own worst critic. But the only good thing through experience, back at finals day several years ago, we'd had two super overs on one day at finals day, the only time I can ever remember it. And I was fortunate that earlier that summer I'd covered some women's one day internationals which were broadcast live, and in that series, if there was a tie, there was a super over. So I had written down all the details for what there was on a super over. So fortunate at Edgbaston on that day when we had the super overs, I'd got it in my notes what was able to happen. So straight away I was able to give the details to the crowd. With about 4-5 overs to go, we were in a different position at Lords for the World Cup. We were actually over just to the left-hand side of the pavilion as you look at it, outside, set up with the music and everything, and the ICC offices were behind us. And I said, someone please check what happens if it's a tie. And that was about the only bit of credit I'll take for the whole thing. So when it did finish a tie, straight away, out came the details again, which hadn't changed, funny enough, since Edgbaston. So I was able to say to the crowd, super over, right, this is what's going to happen. While being a bag of nerves, because wanting England to win. So going back to the point, I'd set myself for New Zealand to win, so I was quite chilled. Then, of course, when it got to the end, England are going to win. So all of a sudden I'm thinking, right, this is going to be completely different. Then, of course, we go to the Super Over. England bat first, do pretty well. Plus, because of the amount of boundaries that have been hit, if it's a tie, England win. That was something else that we were checking, you know, on the iPhones, going through apps, how many boundaries hit in each of the innings to make sure that was dead on. Because again, if you get it wrong, you are the one to be made to look an idiot. So doing that myself. We then have the Super Over, England in great position, and of course then the 6 comes in the Super Over. Jimmy Neesham hits a 6, and all of a sudden it's New Zealand again. So deflated in the chair and thinking, oh, this is too much, this is too much. People passing out all over Lords, you know, the most casualties they'd had at a game in that hour.
Right, okay.
I think they'd had more, I think, in that hour than they'd had in the whole season. You know, not surprising, it was dramatic stuff. And then, of course, Jofra bowling the last few balls and all the drama of the run out, which was just fantastic. And of course, the only slight negative with the whole thing was that because it was a third umpire decision for the run out, it was that thing that England themselves knew, but everyone else was still a bit worried to go too mad too early, because, you know, in case there'd been a problem with the breaking of the stumps or whatever. But yeah, just absolutely amazing. And, you know, the atmosphere was just fantastic.
So when Joss Butler took the stumps to the bails off, for your job itself, did you have to kind of rush downstairs and get everything ready for the presentation?
Well, at that point, it was a case, because they'd called for the third umpire, we couldn't do anything.
Right.
And there was no we couldn't do congratulations England, we couldn't do this is what's happened, because it was just like a normal referral. The players obviously knew because they were close to it. We were by the pavilion, so behind the angle, had no idea how close it was, what had happened. So we had to wait until the decision came up on the big screen before things. And of course, by then everybody's on the pitch, everybody's running. But yeah, when that happened, obviously then it was a case of, right, go through the congratulations, this, that, all the rigmarole. Obviously the stage was going to take 10 minutes to build, so there wasn't the immediate rush to go over there. But with England winning, of course, in my mind I'm thinking, okay, everybody's still going to be watching this, so make sure you get it right.
So do you remember the exact words you gave to introduce Eoin Morgan before he got given
really. All I remember was that our director we had, very funny, just before, Ian Smith was on commentary for the world feed, which was obviously being taken, and I hadn't really thought too much about it, and I won't say his exact words, but literally he told Ian Smith 30 seconds to the presentation, and I was next to the stage. And he said, right, Graham, we're coming to you in 10 seconds. Only 8 billion people watching around the world, my old pal. Don't it up. And it was just what I needed, because it then made me laugh and relax, and we went into it. But again, during that, Kane Williamson got an award.
Player of the tournament.
Player of the tournament. But of course then, he was the next on. So he was one end of the stage, which was a big old stage, long stage. They took him round and he had to come all the way back round. So that needed a bit of filling, which just meant I had to take a bit more time on the next thing, because he was being brought all the way back round the stage to come on to be introduced again. So again, that just needed me to fill a little bit more, just trying to make sure. But overall, it couldn't have gone any better. It was fantastic. And obviously with the lift, with England.
I was going to ask you to reenact that moment.
I'm not sure I can remember the words there was, but it was just a case of, and this again comes from so many presentations over the years where the dignitaries are there handing the trophy over and then are trying to get out the way, and to make it all look right, and just a time as the lift go, the trophy goes up, which was was a fantastic moment. And as I say, if I don't ever do anything else in cricket, I'll always have that honour, of lifting, doing the trophy lift, which was fantastic. So, and then just feeling straight afterwards a case of completely drained, because it was just such a day. And I think obviously the schedule closed was something like 6:30. I think 10 to 9 we would consider going up for a drink, and ironically I was going away for a few days break the next morning, so I think I went for one drink quickly, said goodbye to a few people who'd been involved in the tournament, and dashed off so I could get a train back, because the next morning I was flying out at 7 o'clock to have a break. So just fantastic memory, and that was a great competition. And as I say, it was just for 2/3 of it the most ordinary game of cricket you'd ever like to see, and then turned into something that will never be reenacted again. I don't think so.
And then followed on by the Ashes series. How did Headingley compare?
Headingley was amazing because Ben Stokes,
from your perspective, in terms of
Ben Stokes is a fantastic player, and he's a very, very special talent, and he's a top guy. And that game was just dead, and it was a case of we could be out of here Saturday, after the way England batted in the first innings. And the way that I describe that match is, having been involved for 20 years in red ball cricket, championship cricket, test match cricket, I think I'd only ever seen something like that once before. Because we know in a test match, in a championship game, that if a side's set over 320, 300, 9 times out of 10 they're not going to get there, and 9 times out of 10 they don't get close. But that was just phenomenal, and we were aware the pitch obviously maybe had got a little bit better to bat on, but Australia were a very, very good side, and obviously with Nathan Lyon playing, and the force that he had late in the game, there was always that thing of it's just a matter of time. And I can only recall it happening once before, where again it was a Sussex game, and they I think were playing Gloucestershire many years ago, and I think got 360 odd. Michael Di Venuto got a big score. Tony Cottee got a big score. There was and Sussex chased it down, but that's 1 in 20 years. And again, that was a test match that was 1 in 20 years. But Stokes, when he gets in, the eye that he has is just phenomenal. Some of those shots were breathtaking, absolutely breathtaking. A couple of those sixes and chance in the arm were just absolutely phenomenal.
And at the end of the game, obviously, when he won the match, at the presentation, you obviously must have been next to him. How did you introduce? Do you remember how you introduced him?
Well, two things about that presentation was around the end of that game. And it happened the previous season when Alistair Cook got his century at the Oval, which again was a fantastic moment. And the thing with that, when England won that game that day with Ben Stokes, I said nothing, because it didn't need anything. The drama and emotion of the crowd. There's that great shot when he pushes the ball through and the whole crowd lifts. It didn't need anything. But I have to say, I was actually probably more emotional at the end of that than I probably was at the World Cup. And before the presentation, I went to the bathroom and just gave myself a few minutes, because the emotion in the ground was just absolutely phenomenal. And I think it was, Ben said since in various documentaries, obviously at the time things don't really soak in. And I think a few of the players went on, and I think Joe Root said to him, take this in because of the drama. And of course, the ironic thing was it was one of those things, we were waiting to go home, and it was just a case of this was just delaying the inevitable, and we were being kept there long enough. And of course, it went from that to one of the most extraordinary innings, and players played their part over that, particularly Jack Leach, obviously at the end. But yeah, with that one, I actually didn't go down on the pitch, because where we were working in the newsstand at Headingley. So I just did that from a distance. But I think my big thing there was to make sure that when that presentation was done, he got the recognition for what he'd done and what he was, or what he is doing for England. because that was an innings that, you know, was just out of this world. I would go as far to say that the hitting on that day was some of the most brutal and best I've seen in any format, let alone Test match cricket. You know, and I've been lucky enough to see some great players. That was, you know, just out of this world. But yeah, presentation, making sure that when it came to the man of the match, giving him his spiel and his speech was to the level he was. You know, and hopefully that was done.
Yeah, some phenomenal memories. So how does this summer look for you in terms of scheduling?
Well, summers, we're in the planning stage at the moment. January, February always is about trying to fit everything in, trying to work, making sure I can do as much for Sussex as possible, making sure I can do as much Lords as possible, fixing in with the internationals. Obviously, we've got Test matches this summer with West Indies coming over in June, Pakistan later on, quite a bit in between. Obviously the 100 is new this year, which we're not going to be part of. It's going to be done by somebody new, which we can kind of understand because obviously it's something very, very fresh. So yeah, we'll be doing you know, some Test matches, we'll be doing some T20, we'll be doing several days here and there, trying to fit everything in the schedule, try not to annoy too many people, but no, looking forward to it. And obviously a quieter summer after last year, but that's inevitable when you have you know, a summer with an Ashes and a World Cup. But no, still exciting and still very much looking forward to the opening days of the season. You know, walking in to Hove for the first time, walking into Lords, and obviously seeing how England fare against the West Indies, because it will be two series that England will obviously be expecting and expected to win fairly comfortably on home turf. But no, always exciting. But yeah, you get to September and having done 4 or 5 months of constant work, you know, you're ready for a break. But as soon as April comes round, you're ready for another season to start. So yeah, very much looking forward to it. Perfect,
Graham. Some great stories there. Appreciate you giving us a little insight into your day-to-day life as a voiceover artist as such.
Absolute pleasure.
Neel Khagram, Cricket Life Stories, Graham Woodward. Thank you.